Yahalom is the IDF Special Operations Engineering Unit. They specialize in sabotage missions, demolition and explosion of buildings, sabotage of enemy infrastructure, preparing explosive devices and bombs, neutralizing enemy explosive devices, and locating and destroying terror tunnels. Yahalom is a classified unit, and almost none of its special activities are exposed to the public. They work closely with Sayeret Matkal, Shayetet 13, and other SF units by providing them with demolition, explosive, and sabotage skills. Yahalom was created in 1982 after the First Lebanon War. The IDF needed an engineering unit that could provide advanced and more accurate demolition and sabotage skills than regular engineering forces.
What do falling buildings look like? What do demolitions look like? We are seeing typical implosions, characterized by gutting a building's base and then pulling it into itself. Computer-controlled sequencing fires the explosives in a rapid wave. Notice the jets of shooting concrete, the flashes, the pops, the caving of the buildings as they fall into their footprint, the tremendous billowing clouds of dust. Now let's look at the collapse of the Twin Towers. We are seeing explosions rather than implosions, a first in demolition history. A sequenced rumble becomes a roar as debris is thrown outward. The damage is not contained. Even the windows are blown from neighborhood buildings. What kind of energy enabled this? Would fire hurl metal and concrete sideways into the air? Here, a 600,000-pound chunk of steel, twice the weight of a Boeing airliner, was flung 400 feet, wedging itself deep into 3 World Financial Center on Vesey Street. A FEMA photographer taking pictures of Ground Zero wondered why so many steel beams were jutting from neighborhood buildings. Watt shot pieces of the towers all the way across the street. In April 2006, New Yorkers were distressed to learn that bone fragments, human remains from 9/11, had been found on the roof of the nearby Deutsche Bank building.
And how, in God's name, did those fragments get there?
It surprised me that there was still bone fragments or human remains that had not been discovered.
How is it possible that after 5 years they're finally looking on the rooftops of the Deutsche building? I mean, that's crazy.
And bone fragments less than a centimeter long. How could they be so small? So much to be explained. Why did the South Tower fall first when it was the second tower to be hit? Watch the top of Tower 2 leaning outward, about to topple. Then, suddenly, it disintegrates in midair. What causes this giant slab of steel and concrete to turn into dust before our eyes? Watch both buildings collapsing straight down, directly into the path of most resistance, which is all the floors and all the mass of the building itself. The World Trade Center towers came down in approximately 10 seconds. Seismic data from Columbia University puts the North Tower collapse at about 8 seconds and the South Tower at approximately 10. Lynn Simpson, a survivor from the 89th floor of the North Tower, describes the sight.
And I saw the Trade Center literally collapse in upon itself floor by floor by floor, and it took seconds for it to happen. It was a massive building, and it just pancaked.
10 seconds. These are 110-story buildings coming to Earth at free fall speed, the rate at which an object drops through air. The lower floors would need to give way completely as the floors above them fell. Can a person walk through a closed door as quickly and smoothly as one that is open? A 10-second collapse means the upper floors encountered no resistance from the undamaged floors beneath them. Watch the demolition wave rushing straight down. Here the South Tower is half its original height, but wreckage from the upper collapse has not yet fallen this far. We are watching a demolition moving faster than gravity itself, a building bursting into powder from top to bottom. Here, the core of the North Tower finally gives up. 700 remaining feet of giant steel columns, among the strongest ever erected. What force acts upon the core to make it all of a sudden disappear? Eric Hufschmid, author of the book Painful Questions, is a metal-cutting software engineer.
The floors of the World Trade Center towers were on three-dimensional mesh of steel beams. You have to keep in mind now the floor is about an acre in size. There are thousands of joints all over it. In order for the floor to fall down, thousands of joints would have to break simultaneously. And then if you look at the speed at which this came down, less than 10 seconds, you blink your eye and thousands of joints just pop somehow. The only way you can explain that is with explosives. They had to have had explosives placed all over the floors at the primary joints. And then that would explain how all of the joints broke at such a rapid rate. The debris was crashing from one floor to the next. Debris cannot crash through steel and concrete floors as fast as it falls through the air. And there was no slowing. Explosives had to be breaking the joints ahead of the falling rubble, which is why the top half starts off collapsing slowly and then it starts picking up speed.
This is a pancake collapse. Why don't we see piles of floors at ground zero? And paper blown everywhere. Wouldn't a pancake collapse have trapped the contents inside? What blew this paper all over New York? If you were to drop a billiard ball from the top of the Twin Towers, it would hit the ground in just over 9 seconds, the average time it took for the towers to fall. Helped by gravity and falling through air, the ball will gain speed. The calculation for a pure pancake collapse of 110 stories, with each floor pulverizing to get out of the way, is 96 seconds. In the real world, with the floors creating resistance, a pancake collapse would lose speed. Never would it gain speed.
Yahalom is the IDF Special Operations Engineering Unit. They specialize in sabotage missions, demolition and explosion of buildings, sabotage of enemy infrastructure, preparing explosive devices and bombs. They work closely with Sayeret Matkal, Shayetet 13, and other SF units by providing them with demolition, explosive, and sabotage skills. Demolition and explosion of buildings, demolition and explosion of buildings, demolition and explosion of buildings.
Why don't we begin with Christopher Ketchum? Christopher, start off with a story you begin with in this latest piece, and that's the story of the 5 so-called movers, this story that has been documented, talked about, rumored about. Explain what happened that morning of 9/11.
Now, 3 of these guys were seen on the morning of September 11th, quote-unquote, celebrating on the New Jersey waterfront. Now, I put the quotes around that because it comes from a FBI BOLO, or be on lookout, an alert that was put out regarding these men that day. The celebration apparently consisted of high-fiving, according to one FBI official, of holding up cigarette lighters as if they're at a rock concert, and these three men are behaving rather oddly. Later in the day, they were picked up. Two other men had apparently joined them in a van. The case was immediately handed over to FBI counterintelligence. The men were held for 71 days. They were repeatedly interrogated. They were they repeatedly failed lie detector tests, and then after those 71 days was up, they were sent home, apparently under pressure, or because of pressure brought by the Israeli government and by certain players in the U.S. government, and the story sort of disappeared from there. I mean, 2020 covered this.
Chris Ketchum, you say, you quote the officer who arrested them, named DiCarlo. You say, according to DiCarlo's report, this officer was told without question by the driver of the moving van, Sivan Kurzberg, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Right.
Well, what's interesting there is that these guys, when they were interrogated by FBI, told them that essentially said that they immediately knew it was a terrorist attack, and they actually told FBI that the reason they were celebrating was because the attacks would be beneficial to Israel, that it was a, quote, a good thing for Israel. That's according to the FBI spokesman who spoke on the record about this, and that it would bring sympathy for Israel's political agenda in the Middle East.
And if I can interrupt, I'd like to bring in Mark Perlman to the conversation. Mark, it was your newspaper that the Forward that first broke the story that the FBI thought that at least a couple of these people were Mossad agents. Could you talk about that and how you uncovered that information?
Yes, we ended up writing a story in March of 2002 after several months of reporting, because when this incident happened, obviously a lot of people were intrigued, including journalists, and so everybody was trying to find more information about this. And I've been talking to sources and trying to find out a little bit more, and after a while I was able to confirm that according to the FBI, two of those movers were identified as Mossad agents, and they were interrogated about it.
And what eventually happened to the five men?
They were sent home to Israel in, I think, November, if I remember, allegedly for immigration violations, and they're home.
We don't have much time, and I wanted to get to another story, which was a story of the so-called art students, Christopher Ketchum. Very briefly outline this parallel story.
Well, basically, the phenomenon of the art students, for want of a better phrase, because it is truly a mystery. Even to me, I'm a complete agnostic about this part of the story. The so-called art students were young Israeli men and women who were traveling the country. They were identified by the Drug Enforcement Agency as repeatedly attempting to penetrate government offices, including DEA offices, and to try to sell art, these cheap knockoff oil paintings, to government officials. Now, after September 11th, when in the wake of these sudden attacks, investigators began to go back and look at the nexus of art student activity. What they found was that these art students were moving large amounts of cash. Some of them were reportedly, according to Le Monde, carrying cell phones provided them by the vice consul, an Israeli vice consul in the U.S. Many of them were trained, highly trained in electronic intercept and intelligence work that was far beyond the compulsory military training required by Israeli law. So these are part of the suspicions were aroused, and they remain so.
Let's go to Alexander Coburn. You have published this piece. It is titled Cheering Movers and Art Student Spies. What did Israel know in advance of the 9/11 attacks? What was in the van on the New Jersey shore? Talk about the way the media has covered this, why you chose to cover it, and that last story of Fox.
The main thing, Amy, is that basically this story, which Perlman and others did do good work on, has been systematically suppressed by the media for a very long time, starting with Fox News, which killed off Cameron, the ABC News, which dropped it, and obviously there were thousands of questions which Ketchum goes into in great detail, which should be the subject of congressional hearings and investigations, such as was the Mossad essentially being subcontracted by the CIA to work in the United States on spying, which would be illegal? How much did the Israelis really know? If it was a good thing for Israel, maybe they withheld the final news that the thing was going to land. That's a speculation, of course, but it should be investigated and probed. It's absolutely extraordinary that Ketchum's story, which has been worked on, which is a very long and complex story, could not find any outlet until Counterpunch, which is what we're here for, could publish it. It's obviously the main reason is the word Israel. People drop it like a hot potato. As soon as you hear people saying it's a good thing for Israel, you get the whole lobby came in and had those people whipped out of the jail and sent back to Israel. And since then, all questions regarding it had been systematically choked off. I think that's the sort of, journalistic powder cakes.
Demolition and explosion of buildings, demolition and explosion of buildings, demolition and explosion of buildings.